Welcome to the Mystic Detectives podcast, where we seek to unlock the wonders of the unknown. I'm one of your hosts, Crystal Miller.
And I'm your other host, Andrea Marziano. Well, hey, Crystal, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
That's so good. I'm really good. I've been thinking a lot about the solar and lunar events that are either just recently passed or coming up. Have you considered any of the lunar or solar eclipse stuff that are coming up and how it might affect us?
I haven't really been considering how it might affect us, just because, to be honest, I've been kind of focused on my own self and how every day is going to affect me. For those listeners who, I don't even know if I've ever actually mentioned this specifically, but for those listeners who don't know, I recently had a hip replacement that then devolved into a bucket of mush replacement that is now back to hopefully a healing hip. So I've been a little preoccupied with that, but I have been aware of the solar eclipse that's on April 8th. So I'm aware of it. I haven't really thought about the metaphysical or the mystical, implications thereof. How about you?
Yeah, I've been looking into it a little bit, and just on March 25th was actually a full moon lunar eclipse, and it's said to be in the sign of Libra. And I don't do a lot with signs. I know I'm a Scorpio on the cusp of Libra. Whatever that means, I claim the best of both worlds. So whatever's good in them, I accept. But one of the things that some people have looked into is that this lunar eclipse is the beginning of a new phase. And some people say that it had ended in October, I believe, 14th of last year. Begun October 14th of last year and is ended on March 25th of this year. And people are saying that it's important to pay attention to anything that's coming up that are difficult emotions or hidden toxicity, to release that. Now is the time to release it and set new intentions. I had a friend who actually even said that she invited people to have patience but stay focused, have clear boundaries in all of your relationships, and move more into alignment with their truth, which can be a real challenge, I think, for people generally, and me specifically sometimes, to be in full alignment. But she invited people to look at how they could purge things from their life, both physically and emotionally. And also with the solar eclipse that's coming up on April 8th, to step into more self-love and releasing of fears, especially fears surrounding what she calls the collective, which is the fear of the world and all of the things that are happening in our lives. And she recommended grounding ourselves daily, whatever that can look like. What does grounding look like to you, Crystal?
Oh man, what does grounding look like to me? When I'm really making a concerted or a conscious effort to ground, then I like to do it in kind of a meditation, a quick meditation of where I, consider my chakras, and I kind of go through each chakra until I get down to my root chakra. And then I imagine that roots actually literally come from my root chakra in my body and go into the ground, and find a warm and lovely place to take up residence and just be connected to the earth. If I'm not doing it conscientiously, if it's just something where I kind of have a feeling like something's not right, or just something like that, then I just really will sometimes I'll actually literally go outside and just be barefoot, on the earth, in the lawn or whatever. Other times I will just stand in a room and just kind of say to myself, I'm grounding, and this is a moment of grounding for me, and just kind of let it be that short little thing. And do any of those work better or worse than any other? I don't necessarily think so. I think it can just kind of be about the experience that you may be wanting to have in that moment. But those are kind of the three ways I can think of off the top of my head that I ground. And I think that, because you also asked me what I think about grounding, I think that grounding is really important. And I think that it's often something that, one, people do subconsciously. When you think about people who have to say, wait, I just need a moment to stop and regroup or whatever, that is a form of grounding. I also think that there are a lot of people who don't do a lot of grounding, and they they kind of, you can, as an observer, you can kind of tell. It's this idea of head in the clouds, right? And not only necessarily in a like over optimistic, Mary Poppins sort of way, but also even in just not actually being in the global conversation way, or not reading the room way, or that sort of thing. And I know that when I'm around people like that, I also tend to want more to ground myself, kind of to counteract their not grounded energy, if you will,
Yeah.
And so to me, grounding is very important in most situations. It's excellent to be grounded. So
Yeah, I agree. And like you say, there's a ton of different ways to do it. And one of the things that a friend of mine did recommend is writing in a journal, partially to learn where a person wants to be focused. Because I think a lot of times we think, oh, we want to do this, or oh, we want to do that, but don't really take any actual steps for it. And so we're still sort of, fish in the stream, just cruising along
mhm.
and not really having a plan. And so, one of the things that we can do with this new cycle, whatever part of it we're in, is to go ahead and just focus for just a moment, even if that's all it is, and check in with ourselves. And I feel like, especially in a really big hustle bustle sort of world that we're in, it's hard to check in for ourselves until we're flat down on our backs. And then we think, oh, maybe I missed a sign here or there because we could have done something sooner, or maybe something, even if we couldn't have changed the ultimate outcome, maybe we could have changed the process to get there. So,
Right.
and so I feel like this time from March 25th until April 8th, or if listeners, you're after this time frame, when you hear the podcast, then consider how you can ground and maybe refocus and release some things that aren't working for you. And we'd love to hear how that works out and what kinds of things that you did. If you'd like to write into mysticdetectives.com and let us know, that would be great. And we now can move on with our show, which is a little bit different today, isn't it,
It
than
is.
usual. And it's a new format that we're going to be using more often, where we're going to do a deep dive into different topics. Today, our topic is something near and dear to the hearts of both of us, and it's crystals. And Crystal's name is Crystal, so I think that helps. But that's not the only reason I like crystals. But we both have had quite a bit of experience with crystals. So the history of crystals is a little bit unclear, partially because of the time that the original use of crystals was probably done. It's hard to get information from that time frame. But I've done a little bit of research about crystal history. The research shows that crystal healing probably dated back early as 4000 BCE, because some of the documented use of crystals when they've excavated sites and things like that are going back to the ancient Sumerians. And we can't necessarily know how they use these crystals always, but there is some information that shows that maybe some of the softer crystals like gypsum and hematite, they found with the Sumerians that they had created cylinders, and they had inscribed some of them with different things, and they had images and places, and they also made seals out of them, like seals to wax might have been
Close a
used
letter.
with.
Yeah.
Or other things, because who knows if they actually wrote letters, but they may have marked their territory, they may have marked their property, who knows? And that part's unclear, but they have found the cylinders with them. So that's interesting to me that it was that long ago. And it said, one of the places said that the things that were carved into them may have indicated the station in life that the person had. Were they a ruler, a healer, a warrior, a gardener, or whatever sorts of things were known then, which may be very different from what I just described. But because gypsum and hematite are soft, they could do that. Also, gypsum and hematite, even now, are considered as protective properties. And so they found these cylinders placed in temples and were used, they think, during spiritual ceremonies. So that, I think, is pretty cool. And then even Plato talked about it and said that he found the people from Athens used crystals, and they used them because they thought they could read minds and transmit thoughts with them. Can they? I don't know.
I don't know. I have an interesting thought about gypsum, in that you had mentioned that gypsum is considered kind of a protective crystal. And it that leads me to the fact that drywall is made of gypsum. And so then I think to myself, how many of us consider our homes a protective place for us? And does any of that feeling of security or protection reflect kind of the actual gypsum in our walls? Because, you know, the
Wow.
majority of homes are made with standard gypsum drywall. And just a random thought that popped in as you said that. My dad was a drywaller for much of his life, and so I grew up around drywall. And you know, in a weird way, it holds a place near and dear to my heart. Except for when my dad used to try to tease us and tell us that drywall mud was pudding and put it in our tongues because he's a
Oh,
silly guy. But anyway, just a thought I had. You know, I've long had gypsum as a part of my life. You know. And then so I even worked at a drywall supply company. And it's just, I mean, I'm getting a little tangential now, but that was the thought that came to me is really how much of the fact that we are surrounded by gypsum when we're in our homes for the most part, does that contribute to that feeling of security when we're at home? And actually, is there a way we could even tune into that more, right? That just came to me, like,
yeah.
could we actually stop and say, hey, I'm in a literal crystal palace, right?
Thinking.
Can I tune
Yeah.
into that, right?
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking. Isn't that funny? And also, one way to consider all of this is that we give things their value anyway.
Mhm.
So if that's something we want to give our value to, then yeah, why not? We can create that as valuable or not to ourselves. Now, historically, it's had value, so why wouldn't it still? So I think that's an amazing thought. I've never even considered it. And we live in a log cabin, but there is some sheetrock upstairs, so we still have our crystal palace. I like it. I like it. Um, I love that thought, and it's to even being tangential is certainly some of how some of these great ideas have come into being is because someone thought outside the box, if you will. So, and a little more of the history is Sumerians were purportedly using crystals in their magical formulas 8,000 years ago. Now, I didn't see anything more about what those magical formulas were, but somehow this was discovered, and probably because it was in some sort of vase or something like that. And ancient Egyptians mined for crystals, and they used them to make jewelry pieces, or crystals and gemstones were used in practice for metaphysical properties. And a lot of people use crystals in a lot of things. And I think one of the reasons is because they are less expensive typically than gemstones, but I believe they carry similar or the same properties. And so to have that around for so long, one of the things that they said on the websites I was looking at is that Egyptians use crystals for aids to health and protection. And I know that carries through now, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. But they also had the belief that it would protect their dead. So they would bury a scarab in with their deceased, and they would usually use lapis, and that they felt would protect the people who died in the afterlife. And also they had amulets that were to ensure the well-being for the individual. Now, an amulet could be in all kinds of different shapes and sizes and mean different types of things, but they were always based on protection. And so I found that fascinating. And then there are other things that the Greek used. It seemed like the Greek used the crystals a lot, and they felt a lot of strength comes from crystals and also mystic healing. So that's fascinating to me. And then some of the more American or Native American type things happened and mentioned in the Hopi tribe of Arizona. They use quartz crystals to assist in diagnosing illnesses, according to the records here. It didn't say when exactly, but they said that was used commonly for these sorts of things. And they had crystal amulets, and that helped with healing as well. And in the Middle Ages, they had more and more of these I don't know if it would be called traditions or beliefs or how that would be defined, but they used them in through the Middle Ages also. And the use of crystals in all cultures that I could see kept going until about the 17th century. And for some reason, that started to back off. And maybe some of it was due to other things being available. Maybe some of it was due to people traveling further distances, and maybe they couldn't even find the crystals in their area anymore.
They were also condemned as heretical. And so it came to a point where if you were using, crystals, particularly for healing or any sort of reason for that, you were a heretic. And
Mhm.
and so they kind of the use of crystals kind of went underground and, out into the darkest corners. And so those are the places you don't necessarily see it in the history books anymore.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I know that there was some regaining of use in the early 1900s, and then it went down a little bit in the mid 1900s. And as the New Age culture sparked in 1970s and the 80s, healing gemstones saw a rebirth, and they started to grow in popularity again. But as you know, in the 70s and 80s, that was even more kind of only for new age weirdos, if you will.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And so a lot of people didn't believe in them really at all just because of that. But I feel like the use of crystals has become more mainstream
Yeah.
now. And maybe it's just because of the people I hang out with is mainstream because they all kind of think, but not even the people that are just my friends that do healing work. I feel like lots and lots of people talk about it and lots of people use them as jewelry. And many of them just because they're beautiful, but many of them also because they feel like they do something for them. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I have a unique perspective because I owned a crystal shop for a long time, a metaphysical shop, as we called it, in Pleasant Grove, Utah. And one of the things that surprised me a lot when I was first open was how many quote unquote mainstream people came in. Some people came in just out of curiosity at what the hippies were doing in this new store. Some people came in because um, they had reached their wits end about something, and they had heard that there might be something here in this store that could serve them. Some had come in because they had a hippy dippy aunt that said, go try an aquamarine crystal for your whatever thing. And what I found was that I would even say that more of our traffic and our customer base was not who I would have expected necessarily. It wasn't the new age gurus and the yoga teachers and the Reiki masters that was the majority of who was coming into the store. It was the harried housewife mother of stay-at-home mother of four and the university professor that just things weren't sitting right with him, and he was looking for a different way of seeking answers, things like that. And so I don't even know where to credit that to. I honestly, when I opened this store, it's probably about 2007, 2008. And it was in Pleasant Grove, Utah, which is in Utah County in Utah. And at the time, it was the population was a very high percent Mormons or members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I genuinely anticipated, we prepared for ad nauseum when our grand opening day came for protests and phone calls and everybody being mad that the heretics had moved in, and it didn't happen. What happened instead was these Mormons, these community members were our customers, and some
Mhm.
came in because they were curious, and some came in, but I don't think we heard hide nor hair of any sort of clapback or pushback or uh, criticism or anything like that. And so that was a real surprise to me. Of course, it was a welcome surprise. And it really spoke to, it's not demystifying, but it's like
Just
letting go
being
of the
open.
idea. Yeah, letting go of the idea that there's something wrong with doing something outside of the box or using something outside of the box to improve your life experience, your feelings, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, my point was that right, that while I can't pinpoint, when it went from the 70s uh, hippie weirdos using this and being uh, a counterculture outside of society type thing to where you're Mormon mom could come in and just buy a few crystals and it was no big deal. But I can say that, I witnessed that, at least from the point of view of being the one that was selling, crystals to just the mainstream. And there was a time before I opened the Crystal Ray when I was first introduced to crystals, and my first introduction, truly, I'm sure I'd heard of crystals. I've panned for gold. I've seen pyrite, etc. Right, but truly experienced crystals in this sense, and it was at a fundraiser for something, and the person running the fundraiser was selling just rocks, and she was saying, if you buy this crystal, as she called it, of course, and put it in your pocket, it'll help you be grounded, or it'll help you, this different rock will help you be more open-minded, or this different crystal. And I remember I actually had bought a crystal just as a favor to her, I know you're trying to raise funds, thanks, cool, man, here's your $5 or whatever, right? and without going through the tedium of the story, it was less than 18 months later that I owned the Crystal Ray.
Isn't that wild?
So yeah, it's absolutely wild. And then in the years that I was at the Crystal Ray, I studied crystals. I would say I became maybe not an expert, but very, very experienced and well versed in crystals. And and now they're absolutely, like you said at the beginning of the podcast, they're near and dear to my heart. I feel like I have truly a relationship with crystals, and I believe that it's give and take, and that we both enjoy each other, and not just because my name is Crystal. But yeah, I'm just sitting here looking at my sweet little crystal altar that's here with my, I've got just a lot of crystals on it, and my elephants, and when I even just look over there, those are just my friends, there's my friends over there hanging out with me. Yeah. And actually, I would like to let you say what you have to say before this, but I think it would be fun to kind of get into, how do you pick a crystal, or how do I know what crystal is right for me? What can I expect from crystals? Because I know that it can be very overwhelming. There are thousands of different crystals in this world, and some are really common. Clear quartz is a great example. Rose quartz, another great example. Pyrite, another great example. Some are very uncommon, right? Suleiman is the one that's very uncommon. And so I would like to kind of dive into that and kind of help our listeners, especially if you've never had an experience with crystals or dipped your toe in those waters, I'd like to be a helpful guide in that for those who are listening that are interested. So, but first, I would like to hear what else you have to say.
I agree to all of the things you said. And I feel like one of the reasons that we wanted to do this part of the podcast is because we've covered a lot of topics in our various episodes. And what we want to do is close some of the loops, if you will, and put in some ideas about why these things are important to those of us in the healing arts. And so this is just one of the things that we're going to talk about. Today it's crystals. It'll be some other things coming up. So we hope our listeners enjoy it as much as we do. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about too that came from history is that what's funny is crystals and gemstones have been part of religious practice for as long as anyone has ever recorded. It's even listed in the ancient writings. However a person accepts that, there's crystals are mentioned throughout the Bible, the Quran, and other types of religious documents. And they're in all kinds of different ways, which is funny how with that, how they were mentioned repeatedly through those documents and others too, that then they became sort of taboo, if you will. And, I don't know really where that shift happened or why. But as we talked about, we have some ideas of what that could look like. And then after all of that, and the new age dawns, as people call it, the new age, when more crystals were used in different things, they realized that some people believe that crystal healing is a real thing, that it really heals. Some people believe it doesn't, and that's okay because there's a place for everyone, right? Yeah. And we can talk more about this later on, about how crystals are used in healing. It's very common to use them in healing of the chakras, because chakras are connected with different colors for people who use the chakra healing model. So we can talk about that a little bit more later. But also, people usually connect with a birthstone, which is interesting because they don't necessarily show up as healing per se, but almost everybody says, oh, my birthstone is this or my birthstone is that. Birthstones were actually rooted in crystals, in healing stones throughout the generations and throughout time. So it's interesting that that is something that is accepted readily, but other parts of it aren't. But I think people do tend to accept the things that they believe in or the things that work for them. And that's okay, because I mean, I think that's just natural for us to do. So we'll talk a little bit about more of that and other healing techniques later. But I think it'd be great to talk about how a person can find a stone. Before you go into it though, I have a little story I wanted to share about my daughter. I've been into crystals and stones since I was a child. And I think I may have mentioned this before, that I had a rock tumbler from the time I was about 7 or 8, going almost constantly for many, many years. But I had them going all the time, and I collected stones all the time. But anyway, so that was part of my life for a very long time. And then I started doing the various healing arts. And so it was more a part of my life. And one time, my daughter Juliana decided she wanted to come with me to the crystal store. And so she did. And I said, if you'd like, you can choose a crystal. And she said, but Mom, how do I do that? There's so many, there's hundreds of thousands of crystals in this store. And I said, that's true. But if you take your hand and just put it over the crystals, you'll feel one. One will come to you. One it'll say, I want to come home with you. And just walk around and put your hand out, see what you notice. And at one point, I was on the other part of the store and she ran over to me, Mom, one's calling my name. And I'm like, that's awesome. Which one? And she said, well, we can't get it. And I said, why? Because I had told her kind of the price range we were looking at.
Right.
And she said, because it's too much, Mom. And I said, not if it's calling your name, it's not. And so we went over there. Unfortunately, it wasn't a giant, 12-foot crystal, because that would have been too much, even if it was calling her name. But it was a totally reasonable crystal, and I got it for her. And then she went around and looked at a bunch of other crystals because I think she was thinking, oh, I scored, I can get anything I want. But then she never felt it again. That was the crystal that got to come home with her. And she thought it was the coolest thing. And she thought it was real too, because that was the only one. And she hadn't particularly looked at it thinking it was fantastic. She just knew it wanted to come home with her. So that was the beginning of her crystal journey.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's often a way I would guide people at the Crystal Ray is they would say, what kind of crystal should I get? And it's like, well, we have lots and lots of crystals here. Why don't you take a walk around the store, look at them, touch them, and more than likely you'll have one or more that will just feel right, that will speak to you. I've had customers and friends, not just customers, but people in my life that they'll pick up a crystal and they'll feel it vibrate in their hand. It's humming in their hand, and they just that they just know that that's the crystal they need. And I think this segues well into kind of one of my favorite ways to guide people who are new to getting crystals, particularly if they're uncomfortable or whatever with the idea of just walking around and letting one speak to them or call to them. And that is to use the chakra system. And kind of, what do you want this crystal to do? And so, for example, just to make it a little less obscure, to make it more specific, for most of my life, I thought that turquoise was like the ugliest stone in the world. It was like a trash stone. And I do not mean to offend anybody like that by that. I was a child. Give me some grace, please. But I was like, I don't want anything to do with it. Like, bleh. It's an ugly color, it's an ugly stone, it's an ugly shape, etc. And when I started working with crystals and playing with crystals, and just having crystals be a part of my life, one of the things that came up for me just in general, and I guess I would say even beyond crystals, doing we can just easily call it new age stuff, right? Like, but when I was doing like Reiki and stuff, it came up that my throat chakra was very, very inactive, meaning that I was not speaking up for myself. And boy, howdy, was I not. I was taught that women are to serve and be quiet, I guess. I don't know how to put it. I want to say keep sweet and obey, but how's that? Men are in charge, and what they say goes. And AKA the patriarchy. But anyway, I digress. Anyway, so in this healing, I found that my throat chakra was very, very slowed down, very inactive. And my mentor's recommendation was to choose a stone that aligns with the throat chakra and wear it more and carry it more and just have it in my life more. And my very first thought was, she better not say turquoise. And of course, she didn't dictate anything, but she was like, turquoise is actually kind of like the perfect throat chakra stone. And I was like, curse you. But I believed in what we were working on together. I believed in, the healing power of crystals, et cetera, et cetera. To make a long story less long, I did start carrying turquoise with me and then started wearing turquoise. And over time, it became truly one of my favorite crystals. And interestingly, in my opinion, not only that, teal and aquamarine and that kind of blue-green color became one of my favorite colors. Nothing will ever overshadow pink for me, but after pink, that is my favorite color. And so that it was just this interesting transition, and to where, again, not only did I not actively dislike turquoise anymore, I loved it. I love it still. And guess what? I started speaking up for myself. Here I stand many, many years later, having a podcast speaking up for myself to all of you.
That's so true. And also, I believe that a lot of times those things that we really don't like or resist are the things that we need the most in our lives.
Yeah.
I work with essential oils as well. And some people say the essential oil that smells the nicest to you is the one you want to use the most. I actually have found in my practice the opposite to be true, that the essential oil that smells the least wonderful to that person is probably the one that they get to have to balance their systems. And I found that also, as you mentioned with crystals, that the one that they're least attracted to is because they're blocking something a lot of the times. And so bringing that in is a great way to go. So then when you're talking about the chakras and assisting someone to choose a stone, and they do say something like that, well, I can't stand yellow. What did you advise them, or did you at all?
So typically, if, let's say they did say that, I can't stand yellow. First of all, I would take them to the yellow stones and I would say, here's our assortment of yellow stones. And I would kind of let them look over those. Oftentimes, and I would say, pick one. And oftentimes I would find that they would pick one on the periphery, right? It was orangish or it was green yellowish. It wasn't necessarily right in the middle, not a perfect citrine or a perfect lemon stone or whatever, right? It was just, I guess citrine's not that perfect yellow, but regardless. But yeah, it was kind of a peripheral thing. And to that, of course, I say, excellent progress, right? Like there's no prescription that says, if you're resistant to yellow, you better go right for that sunflower, baby. Let's work our way in. Let's absolutely do kind of maybe a sage green or a yellowy orange or whatever the case may be, because not everybody has to dive in head first into the deep end, right? Like there's nothing wrong with, like, I said it earlier in this podcast, there's nothing wrong with just dipping your toe in the pool. We're not here to force anything. We're here to show you your options. We're here to guide you. We're here to encourage you in what we believe will serve you. But we're never going to be a person that pushes you in, that while you're
Yeah.
not looking, we shove you into the deep end.
Well, and one of the things too I'd like to bring up for the yellow, usually that's considered related to the solar plexus, which has a lot to do with insecurity and low confidence. So if you think about it, if a person, especially in the yellows, is going, oh, that might be an indicator of one of the things they might be dealing with. And
Right.
then the way that I have found a lot of times to discuss a difficult topic is bring in the facts as I know them.
Yeah.
So, that's interesting because sometimes if this is something you feel resistance on, some people find that they might have some insecurity or low confidence.
Mhm.
And isn't that interesting?
Think of an experience where you felt some low confidence or you felt insecure. I mean,
Sure.
a lot of times a good way to open that door is to not make it about a flaw about them, right? Let's make it about a
Mhm.
specific experience. I was really scared to go back and tell the guy at the counter that he made my sandwich wrong, right?
Mhm.
That's a moment of insecurity. And that's just as valuable of I'm afraid to leave my husband, right? Those are
Mhm.
equally valuable experiences of insecurity that can be a door to open or a way to move forward. Um, are they equally as scary? Probably not. But like as far as, core value, they're equal in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like that's an accurate statement because it can, a lot of times we can look at the small stuff or what may seem smaller. Like I didn't confront them about a sandwich that was incorrect, even though
Mhm.
will that change any of the world's functioning? Probably not. Could I have
Right.
gagged down the sandwich? Well, yeah, but I don't have to,
Right.
and
Right.
and I deserve it to be correct. So as I see that, then what else do I see? How else can I move forward? And so I feel like these crystals themselves have healing powers, and I also think that they can be conversation starters and
Mhm.
maybe choosing a direction for a healing art of some sort. And I feel like the
Right.
direction of suggesting the chakras is a really good way to go because it can open other sorts of discussions that, well, if you feel like you have an issue with that, maybe you can consider Reiki, or maybe a tarot card reader might be good for you, or something
Mhm.
like that that may bring these things forward for you. So that's an excellent way. Did most people respond to the chakra guidance?
Yeah, most people did, even whether they understood the chakras or not. I found that a lot of people were very quick to trust me, and I think that then when they were coming into the store at that point in their lives, a lot of times, um, they were way outside of their comfort zone, and they were kind of in a state of a Hail Mary, if you will,
Mhm.
of like nothing else has worked, and so I'm going to do this weird thing. I mean, what else am I going to do? Um, and I know that they didn't walk into my store and be like, Satan's here, I gotta go. Right. That was nobody, and nobody ever had that experience in my store.
Not
Um,
that they told you
not that
about.
they told me anyway. And I never saw anybody walk in and walk right back out. But yeah, and so and I cultivated that, right? That wasn't by accident. That was absolutely by design. That walking in, I wanted everybody to feel like they were safe, that they could be trusted here. They could be vulnerable, etc. And it's funny because just on a little bit of an aside, um, that's actually my personal statement is that I provide a safe space for people personally myself, and I've heard that time and time again since I've discovered and accepted that about myself. And so I feel like I kind of, it's funny. It wasn't necessarily on purpose, but I poured that into my store. I poured that part of myself into my store, and then coincidentally, haha, named it after myself as well. And I really, I didn't do those two things in tandem with each other on purpose, but that is kind of how it happened. And so I really feel like people could come in with whatever fears, trepidations, doubts, even that they had, and at the very least, they would be opened somewhat, a minute amount or a gross amount. Who knows? But there, something about walking through that door brought an opening and a willingness to accept something different, I guess, for those who were doubtful. And of course, there were people who came in also that were diehard believers, and like right where they wanted, right where to go for what they wanted, etc. But yeah, I think that, so if we take a little bit of a curve and we say, hi, my name is Mary, and I love crystals, and I want to help my friend love crystals, and she's a devout religious person, and the idea of using crystals to heal makes her feel like a heretic, to use the same word, whatever. Sometimes, we can, if we just be a safe space for them to talk about their experiences and whatever, and let them kind of open themselves up. One thing, if we were to use that exact example, right, I would say, let's say that Mary's issue is that, so let's say that her faith is waning, right? And so I'm going to tie, just for this example, I'm going to tie faith to the third eye. And so maybe, something you could do is, when you are meeting with Mary, or you're spending time with Mary, wear a lapis lazuli amulet, wear lapis lazuli earrings, right? Wear an indigo or a dark blue shirt. These things matter, even if it's minutely, if it's just, if I had $1 for the number of times that I've creaked open a very, very shuttered, dark and dusty door just by wearing a piece of jewelry, I'd have at least $30. I subscribe to the idea that the universe is all vibrating molecules, right? Every single one of us is actually made up of the same molecules. We're all just a whole bunch of molecules vibrating into these clusters that make us people, or rocks, or TVs, or whatever. And so I believe that colors vibrate at certain frequencies. I believe that crystals vibrate at certain frequencies. I believe that if you mix a color with one type of crystal, it's going to vibrate one way. If you mix a different color with that same type of crystal, it's going to vibrate differently. And so, in making that small step of just kind of bringing in a different vibration, you can help your friend Mary potentially to start to be open to looking at her faith. And I'm not saying looking at her faith to dismiss it, or I'm by no means am I saying that. We're talking again about somebody in a crisis of faith, and Mary gets to figure that out and dive deeper into her faith, and maybe recreate that connection of faith, or make a disconnection. And that's not for me to decide. It's not for me to, she's just come to me and said, I'm in a crisis of faith. I don't know what to do, right? She's confided in me. And so I'm just going to do what I can do that doesn't make her uncomfortable. Again, not saying, well, here's this crystal, put this in your pocket, wear these earrings, wear this crown or whatever, right? Like, I'm just saying, we can have conversation. We can go shopping. We can go get coffee. And I might wear some lapis earrings, or I might wear a sodalite pendant.
One of the things that I wanted to bring up right now too is that our video team are going to be doing a video episode documenting what they find in frequency and magnetic fields and things like that, in crystals too.
Yay.
Which is one of the things I thought would be fascinating. Now, there's a lot of people, again, that either believe or don't believe, or somewhere on the fence, and that's okay. As you said, we're not trying to convince anyone. We're just talking about what we've learned, what our experiences are. And so it'll be fun to watch what they find and how they can relate it to anything particular. And when you were talking about, we'll just go over the chakras really quickly.
Sure.
From the top is the crown chakra. And that is talking about bringing awareness and having the higher perspective or higher consciousness. And that is very often the clear quartz, and something clear or bright, and in a clear or white tone. The third eye, as you were just discussing, is around the color indigo. And some people will just call that purple because it's easier for people to remember, but it's in sort of the purple tones. The throat chakra, as you mentioned, also is around the colors blue, and that can be in any part of the spectrum. And when I've been working in my practice, the throat chakra has been by far the most clogged or disconnected chakra with anyone I've ever worked with. And we find stuff in other areas, but the throat seems to be the biggest. And the next is the heart chakra, and that's usually pink and sometimes green. And those go with keeping the heart chakra and the heart space open. And rose quartz is a very popular one to use for the heart chakra. And then there's the solar plexus we mentioned before, and that's in the yellow tones. And the sacral chakra, which is the chakra about creativity and passion. And this is one that represents also pleasure, sexuality, and creativity, as we said. And that's considered usually in sort of the red tones, or sometimes I even look at it as more of a brickish red, because
Or
the
blood
root
orange,
chakra.
kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So carnelian is one that is very common, and that's, to me, as you say, as an orange or a brick red or something like that. And the root chakra is what's considered the foundation of your physical being and also the foundation of your emotional health. Because if we look at many of the big thinkers have said that we can't move on in a situation if we are not clear all the way through, especially at our base. So you've got all of the Maslow and the hierarchies and things like that that start at the bottom and move up. So if our root chakra is congested, if you will, then it can make it hard to move any further. And the colors that are usually associated with the root chakra are the earth tones, the darker colors, anything from hematite and the black or even the dark reds are usually considered to work with the root chakra. And we can balance those chakras in a lot of different ways. And one of the simplest ways, as we are talking about crystals, is a whole set of crystals that cover all of those chakra colors. And a person can use them in a lot of different ways. I will sometimes have person place the colors on the chakra as they can. Now, sometimes it's hard to put it on the crown, so I'll just say set it near it, things like that. People don't have to be working in energy. It's a lot about intention. It doesn't necessarily have to be exactly step 1, step 2, step 3. In fact, a lot of times those steps, those specific steps, can be blocking themselves. And where people get so tied up in the mechanics of it, they can't actually achieve the process. So I encourage people to do what makes sense. If it works for you to put it on the chakra itself, do it. If it doesn't, just put it near it or even think about it or something like that.
I think that, Andrea, you really actually just nailed it when you said it's set an intention, because it really is about the intention. If I draw a literal stick figure and I place stones fit each chakra on that piece of paper, and my intention is that that stick figure is me, and that those stones are in the places of my chakra, and they're there to positively influence or impact my chakras, then they will. I mean, that's the way that the power of intention works. And so it's about do what works for you, do what's least scary to you, do what's least the least amount of work, as long as your intention is pure. You know, there are some people that maybe want to paint their body with all of the colors of the chakra. That's a lot of work, right? Like stick figure on a paper. If that's your deal, then great. It's it's really all about the intention and connecting your own chakras to that, whatever method you're using.
And also, to go back to some of that, is if I feel like my throat chakra is blocked and I want to use something yellow, that's not going to break me.
Right.
That is just
Right.
the impression or the feeling that I had.
Sure.
Now, I think that's really important to remember, because people can get, again, like I just said, stuck in the mechanics of it. Well, it's supposed to be this way, so I must be wrong. We
Right.
get to trust as we use our intuition and our spiritual gifts or our mystic abilities or whatever like that we want to call them. We get more comfortable in knowing what our truth is. So does our truth look exactly the same? Ours doesn't. You and I,
Right. Yeah.
we have different things that we do and don't do and believe and don't believe.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that might not work. In fact, it may work better for me to do something a little differently because of the way I see things. Or if I'm colorblind, how can I pick up the right color? Well, maybe somebody can organize, or maybe I just let my spirit guide me and tell me what I get to do.
Mhm.
And that, I think, is where the key is listening to our hearts, listening to our spirit. And as we use these gifts and these skills, and whether we use them with crystals or other sorts of techniques we've talked about, as we use them, we'll get more comfortable with them. And that's the thing that to me is so exciting about it,
Yeah.
is that our body, our mind, our spirit knows what we need if we let it figure it out.
Yeah. And going back to kind of what a lot of this episode has been about, it's also perfectly acceptable and great to start with a mentor or a guide. And it's also perfectly acceptable and great not to, if you feel like you can do something, if you feel like let's just say, theoretically speaking, you listen to this podcast and you're like, hey, I've never thought of using a crystal for, healing or whatever. And you want to just go right to a crystal store, pick one out, go home and use it. Great. If you feel differently than that, if you feel like this seems really overwhelming and scary and I wouldn't even know where to start, and you want to go to a crystal store and you want to talk to the employee that works there for 3.5 hours until you feel like you have chosen the right crystal and then you take it home, great. I mean, as long as
Yeah.
that employee has 3.5 hours of time to spend with you. But
Which may or may not, whatever works.
However it works for you, our goal, our wish is that you try it.
Mm-hmm.
However that looks, because we believe in it strongly. We've had plenty of experiences of beautiful things, beautiful successes come from it. And so that's kind of, I think I would say, our resounding message is try it.
Absolutely. And one thing I'd like to dovetail on some of what you just said is when you purchase a crystal or you find a crystal or however it comes into your life, I encourage you to clean it.
Yes.
Because crystals will hold energy, either dark or light energy, or some of both, or whatever, of the previous owner or the previous user or anything like that. People will come into the stores and lots of people will touch it. There'll be energy of the people that work at the store, all of the things. And so if a crystal is a hard crystal, then it can be run under water and it can be cleansed that way. If they're softer crystals, there's other things to do with them. One of the things that I do is I use rock salt, and that can help. And then sunlight and moonlight, it can help to cleanse them too. What would you encourage your people to do when they purchase from you crystal as far as cleaning them?
So just to give an example, these are just 2 examples, just to make it really easy. A hard crystal, like a quartz crystal, would be considered hard. Selenite would be considered soft. So selenite is something I could break with my hands. If I were to run it underwater, it would start to melt and disappear, kind of like if I were to run a block of salt underwater.
Yes.
So that's just kind of when we say soft and hard. What I agree with what you said. All of those things. I've had people, myself included, bury their crystals in the sand or the dirt, in the backyard. I've had crystals that are designated as cleansing or clearing crystals, and I just make them partners for a while. I've done essential oils on a crystal. Again, essential oils will potentially discolor or melt soft crystals. So again, something like selenite, I wouldn't recommend using essential oils on unless you did it in a very, 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 very copious amount of carrier oil. And even then, that still might discolor your selenite crystal. So
and most places where a person will purchase crystals will have that information.
yeah.
And if a person is not clear about what their crystal is, probably most crystals are listed online. So if a person types in the crystal type and things like that, but most people who sell crystals will know what they're selling to a person.
For sure.
And so any of those methods, and also one of the ways is just sending the intention of clearing with the crystal.
Yeah, if you're
just
practiced in it, I've cleared crystals with Reiki, of course. You can have someone clear a crystal for you if you feel like you need that. So I have cleared crystals for others, particularly with Reiki. Sometimes I just hold a crystal, like you said, the intention of clearing it. I just hold a crystal, kind of hold it between my 2 hands and send it, good vibes, and just say,
release,
I'm
release, or whatever you get.
Yeah, exactly. I'm cleansing you. You can let go. Like I fill you with love and light and happiness and awesomeness, and let's be pals, whatever.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things too I really want to bring up is that we've talked about a variety of methods, and none of this has to be complicated.
Right.
None of this has to be complicated at all. And that's one of the reasons why more often than not, most of the crystals that I'm drawn to are hard crystals so I can wash them.
Hmm.
And I've taken a bag, a mesh bag, and put all my crystals in it and put it when I was living in Utah. I went to the Provo River and I held it in the river, the bag,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I just let the river wash things through. And what's
Hmm.
beautiful about water or light is all of that will transmute the energy. So it's not like when I wash my crystals upstream, the person that's downstream is going to get nasty energy. It all
Right. Right.
transmutes into light. So no one has to worry about that. And
Right.
another thing I wanted to talk about really quickly is that people who believe and use crystals a lot also usually believe that a crystal has a life cycle for that individual person. So, say if
Hmm.
I'm using a crystal in my practice, and I know in one of our other podcasts, I talk about crystals that had broken.
Hmm.
And if I have a crystal that breaks, to me, that tells me it's complete in my life the way I've been using it. Now, does
Hmm.
that mean I have to throw the crystal away? Not to me, it doesn't.
Hmm.
It may mean that I will now use half of it at a time, or it may mean that I want to bury some of it into the yard because it needs to be regenerated or something like that. Or maybe it means I get to gift it to someone.
Right.
And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the crystal. It just means to me, the way I read it is that it is complete with the purpose I've been using it.
I agree. And I've actually had crystals that I like consider my very best friends that say to me, I'm going with Kathy. And I'm like, really?
No.
And I gift it to my friend Kathy. And you know what? Typically when that happens, the space is opened and something better comes that I didn't even know I wanted or needed, you know?
Right.
And so you really pinned it down when you said it doesn't have to be complicated. Now, hey, if you want to complicate the hell out of it. I don't care. Right. But again, it goes back to intention. If your intention is just to complicate it, then I feel like you're probably spinning your wheels and I wouldn't recommend it. But if your intention is, if you believe that the more complicated it is, the better it is, and you truly believe that, my hat's off to you. I sometimes find joy in doing things the complicated way and feel that my crystals find joy that way as well. So just, yeah, do what feels right, that
Mhm.
that brings joy and love and light. Yeah, that's kind of the bottom line, the closing message, if
Yeah.
you will.
I love that. And also, I invite people to remember that crystals in the form of jewelry are still crystals.
Yes.
So they still get to be cleansed. In fact, maybe even more than crystals a person might have just lying around the house. Because if you think about it, excuse me, when I wear my various crystals, I have this amethyst point necklace that I love to wear. And when I'm wearing it, I'm usually out and about. And
Hmm.
so everybody's energy is coming up and around it. And I believe I shared this in one of our episodes, but one of my friends who had had more experience with crystals at the time that they had told me is that I was wearing that necklace in a group event, and she said, "When was the last time you cleansed that?" I said, "Oh my goodness, never." And
Yeah,
because it was jewelry, and it hadn't occurred to me that jewelry crystals are crystals.
you're right.
And she said, "You really get to do that today." And she said, "I feel a lot of dark energy around it." And I thought, "Oh my goodness, I hadn't even thought of it." So that day, I actually took every piece of crystal jewelry I had, because I have quite a few of them, and cleansed them all because I felt like that theory would ring true to all of them. And I actually am going to put a lot of my crystals out tonight because of the lunar eclipse.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a perfect time to do it. And
Hmm.
some of my crystals that either can't, I mean, I have thousands and of crystals, and you probably do too. But when my friends were moving me into my house in Polsbo, they said, "Why do you have so many rocks?" And another box that says rocks. And I do. I have lots and lots of them. And so for me, the crystals that I either can't or just frankly won't make time for bringing out, I will set the intention that they will receive the cleansing from the lunar energy that returns, and set all of the things. I mean, right next to me, I have a very big, well, it's not very big, but a big amethyst.
Mhm.
And I probably won't carry it out, but I will still imbibe it with the energy to cleanse itself.
Yeah.
And so a person can do that too. Back again, I know we've used the word intention so many times, but it's so true. And so that's vital to know. The last thing I'd like to touch on, Crystal, is how does a person find out or know if a crystal is a real, whatever it says, like this amethyst? Is it a real amethyst? How do I know?
That's a great question. And actually, particularly because as we've seen an influx, a rise of things coming out of China in particular, I'm actually specifically thinking of at this moment the TikTok shop and Temu. We are seeing a lot of fabricated crystals come out. And when I say fabricated, I do not mean grown. I mean actual pieces of glass that they're passing off as crystals. So one way I would say is know your vendor. While I don't flat out discourage necessarily buying crystals from China, if that's how your budget works or how your preferences are, whatever that may be, I would, however, recommend that you vet the seller, and not only that, educate yourself on crystals. There are a lot of telltale things that can give you some insight into whether something is a piece of glass or whether something is an actual true crystal. I personally have no objection to man-grown crystals. Something that's grown in a petri dish is not the right word, but you can grow
That's
crystal. I personally believe that a piece of glass is not going to give you the properties of a crystal. There's something about, in my opinion, the mineral makeup, the molecular makeup, and that sort of thing of crystals that matters. So number one, my biggest thing would be vet the person you're getting it from. My number two would be educate yourself on the properties of crystals. That may sound overwhelming, but there are a lot of resources out there. One that I would highly recommend. There are two that I would highly recommend. I only have one at the top of my head, and that is the Crystal Bible. There are actually several, what are the words? There are several volumes of the Crystal Bible now. There weren't back in my heyday, but there are, and that is a resource that I trust a lot. The other one, I'm just going to look on Amazon really quickly to see if I can find it very quickly. I won't take a very long time, but there was another one that I found. So this looks like there's now 3 volumes of the Crystal Bible, and you can get those all together. You can buy them one at a time. I highly recommend them.
One of the other things I wanted to mention is a few other things that you can know if a crystal is real or not. And if it looks so perfect, it probably is not
It
real.
probably isn't. That's right.
And if it has no defects at all, if it doesn't have some sort of change to the surface, things maybe inside it. And also, if you learn about crystals, you'll know that they can't contain other metals and minerals, so they're going to be heavier
Right.
than glass. And those are some things to consider.
I did
you
find the
find
other
it?
book, which I'm super delighted because it's equally as wonderful as a Crystal Bible. I like them for different reasons. I cannot rate them one over the other. Truly, I mean that from with all of my heart. And it's called The Book of Stones: Who They Are and What They Teach. And it's different than it just gave me chills. I love that book so much. It's different in that the Crystal Bible is much more about identifying. It does have some of the properties that it can and the healing traits that it has and sort of those things. Also, I don't want to discount the Crystal Bible set by any stretch, but the Book of Stones is just kind of a different take. I don't know. I would just say, look at it. Just look it up on Amazon, even if you don't buy it. Just take a look, see what you think. Buy both, buy none. It's up to you. But those are the two. As a long-time crystal connoisseur and semi-expert, those are the two that I would most highly recommend. So
yeah, and what's beautiful now is, as opposed to when we both first started getting into all of this, is the internet will tell almost everything. So the color and brightness of a crystal can show whether it's real or not. And a lot of times, well, most times, a real crystal will have a tip that's translucent, so it's more visible to be seen through. A crystal that is man-made will not usually have that. And if it does, it's in a perfect line. And so again, another thing, if it's too perfect, then it probably isn't real. And also air bubbles. Real crystals they'll have cracks, they'll have scratches or small particles or air bubbles in them, where a man-made not a lab grown, or however we want to call it,
Right.
but a man-made crystal, which is usually glass, or sometimes they'll even take clear quartz, which is a crystal, and they'll color it. They'll infuse
Yes.
color in it under pressure and temperature. And so, yes, you have a real crystal because it's a quartz, but quartz crystals are one of the least expensive. So sometimes people will make a quartz crystal look like something else. To me, that's better than glass because at least you're getting a real crystal.
Yeah. Yeah.
And is it bad to get a crystal that's quartz that's changed to something else in appearance? I would say no. However, I would like to know I'm buying the crystal I'm actually trying to buy.
Yes, agreed.
And that
And I
to
would
me
also look out for a price increase, right? I don't want you to
Mhm.
think you're buying an amethyst when really what you're getting is a purple dyed quartz. Those are going to be two very different price points. And I don't
Hopefully.
want you to, I don't want you to pay the amethyst price for a purple dyed quartz.
Yeah, and that's where it goes back to a lot of times the adage of you get what you pay for is true. That doesn't mean you have to pay hundreds and thousands of dollars for crystals. That means though that if you see one that's a large crystal for $1, it's unlikely to be real, whatever they're saying it is.
Yep,
And
that's true.
that's why it's so important to know your vendors,
Yeah.
because if a person knows their vendors, they know who they can trust.
Yep.
And so it's one of the best ways to do it. And so it's super important. And we like to think that nobody's going to take advantage of somebody, but people do. And so this way you can have a better idea of what you're looking for. And so when you first start buying crystals, I usually recommend going into a store, a reputable store that's especially been around for a while. And one of the things about stores is Crystal talked about how her store, she intentionally set the mood and the tone of the store. When you walk into a store, if it doesn't feel comfortable, you don't have to stay.
Mm-hmm.
You can leave.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe there's someone there, maybe something's happening that doesn't feel okay to you, then trust yourself. Most crystal and healing stores are going to be a nice place to be if you feel uneasy for whatever reason. That's my message, is that you don't get to stay.
Yeah, this is not the place for me. And it might be the place for somebody else just fine.
And it might be the place for me in an hour.
Right.
Yep. It's hard to tell. And because I've been to places like that where I've walked in. One place, I was in Sedona, Arizona, which has zillions of crystal shops.
Yeah.
And I walked into one and it didn't feel like a dark energy. It was just too much. It was too much. And I had to come back when there were fewer people in it, because for some reason, whatever had brought up my mystic radar was too strong. And I had to step back and come back in when I could see there were only one or two people. The first time I went in, the store was basically packed, and I just stepped out. And so it was a good store. I enjoyed the store when I went back, but at that moment, it did not fit for me. So I would say that for me, the last thing I'd like to say about all of this is, dear listeners, you get to follow your heart, listen to your messages that you hear from your spirit or the universe or whatever you'd like to call it. And we invite you to lean into an experience trying crystals and see what you find out.
Yeah. And if you have questions about crystals, of course, you can always ask us. We're happy to help. We're happy to point you in the right direction if there's such a thing to be done. We do invite you to send us your questions, send us your thoughts. Those can be sent to us through our website, mysticdetectives.com. And another thing I wanted to bring up, just kind of unrelated, but related to the podcast, is we really want to bring you information and podcast episodes that are interesting to you. So we're asking for your feedback on what we've provided for you so far. Are there things that we have not covered that you would like for us to cover? Are there things that we've covered that maybe you would like us to go more in depth with? Are there things that we've covered that you didn't care for? And of course, why? You can reach us the same way through our website at mysticdetectives.com, but we'd really love to hear from you. We'd really love to have your feedback. We want, this podcast is for you. It's not for us. And we want to bring you topics that you will enjoy and that you will take something from. And, to be frank, we want to keep you coming back and to keep helping you learn.
Thank you. And we'd also love to hear your stories about any experience you might have with crystals too.
Yeah.
So that would be so much fun, because we just really enjoy that. So thank you very much. We'd love to hear from our listeners. Please contact us at mysticdetectives.com to leave a comment, share a story, or ask a question. As always, we invite you to subscribe, share, and leave reviews to support the podcast. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Stay curious
and keep exploring.